my name is Erica Cootie, and I'm going to be presenting about my research and experiences I had while participating in the Global Link China program. I apologize for not being able to be here today, but I hope you enjoy my video presentation. Briefly, I would like to state the reason why I wanted to go on this trip. I wanted to participate in this program because I had taken many international relations classes at ICU and wanted to visit a place that I had studied so much about. Many of the IR classes at ICU focused on the Asia-Pacific region, and countries such as China and the US, who is allied with Japan, are regarded as key players. By participating in this trip, I wanted to see firsthand how China really is because as someone who is American and Japanese, I am frequently affected by my own bias and generally negative portrayals of China in the media. On this slide, you can see the outline for my presentation. First, I will present my research questions and my hypothesis. Then I will talk about the historical memory of World War II for China and Japan, and then how China is in the process of nation building, and then my biggest change in personal view of China and the region. Then finally, I will conclude and end with what I think other ICU students can learn from this type of trip. Here are my 3 research questions that I explored while on this program. What is emphasized when remembering World War II for China and Japan? How does the process of nation building affect the way Chinese people remember the history of China? And finally, do the Chinese university students of today hold strong negative feelings about Japan? Here is my hypothesis. The narrative of history that the Chinese Communist Party presents to its people helps unify citizens in order to stabilize the path toward development. Now I will talk about the current historical memory formation in China and Japan concerning World War II. In China, I learned that there was an emphasis on Imperial Japan's brutality when learning about modern history in terms of the Nanjing Massacre or Unit 731. While in Japan, I'm aware that there is a lack of an emphasis on modern history in the education system and more of a focus on ancient history. I have also frequently heard from many people, such as my cousin who grew up in Japan, that Japanese history is very long and history portions on entrance exams do not touch upon modern history to the extent that China does, which leaves many young Japanese ignorant about Japan's imperial past. In China, I also became aware that there is a state-run patriotic education campaign that went into place after the Tiananmen Square massacre in order to re-educate the youth of China about China's victimhood during World War II. But it is also important to remember that in China there is heavy censorship in the media, which makes it difficult to access information such as critical literature. Japan, on the other hand, has freedom of press and internet access, which means that people in Japan have the ability to research and form their own opinions if they wanted to do so. When we visited Nanjing, we had the opportunity to visit the Nanjing Massacre Museum. Just as I mentioned before, in China there is a big focus on modern history, and I felt that this was true when we visited this museum and saw that it was very crowded with many Chinese families, couples, and tour groups. The content of the museum was very saddening, but I felt as though it was an important place to visit as someone with Japanese ancestry in order to bring solidarity to the victims and in order to remember history to make sure an event like this does not happen again. Now I will answer my second research question concerning how China is in the process of nation building. Officially, China is still considered a developing country because China's per capita income is still a fraction of that in advanced countries, and its market reforms are still incomplete. In addition, rapid economic ascendance has brought on many challenges, including high inequality, rapid urbanization, challenges to environmental sustainability, and external imbalances. China also faces demographic pressures related to an aging population and the internal migration of labor. Here is a picture of a map I took at the Shanghai Museum. This map shows the different nationalities or ethnic groups in China and the locations they live in. Previously, I was unaware of the diversity within China, and now I know that it is another challenge when China is trying to unify the country from the east to the west. Finally, I will answer my last research question concerning Chinese university students of today. What I learned after having the opportunity to talk to students from China Foreign Affairs University in Beijing was that the younger educated generation in China know the difference between Japanese people and the Japanese government, which means they do not reject everything that is Japanese. By talking to students, it was easy to see our cultural similarities in terms of the media in forms of movies, animation, or video games, pop culture, and even the types of food we like to consume. It was also interesting to hear that some students were critical of the CCP in terms of the constitutional changes that took place in China during our visit. Overall, it was very interesting to see that many Chinese are politically aware. Now I will move on to my biggest change in personal view of China. I previously believed that China was more similar to Japan. However, after visiting China, I felt as though there were more parallels between China and the US. After visiting and seeing a Chinese flag and monuments of Mao Zedong wherever I turned, it was clear that there is a sense of national pride which to me almost mirrored the US due to the high presence of American flags in the US. This type of national pride may be partly due to how China and the US are both top economic powers in the world. In addition to this national pride, I noticed a social-cultural similarity between China and the US of looking out for one's own self and family before the group, whereas in Japan there's very much a concern for the group or society as a whole. To conclude, I found that in order for China to unify such a large and diverse population, the CCP uses a shared history in order to create a national identity as it rapidly develops. I would like to end with talking about what fellow ICU students can learn from this kind of trip. Overall, I believe that traveling, seeing, interacting, and experiencing are essential for learning, and trips such as the Global Link China program will lead students to have a deeper, more well-rounded understanding of the world without being completely blinded by bias. I would highly recommend this program or any other similar programs because we are privileged enough as ICU students to have these opportunities. Here are my references, and I would finally like to thank Professor Nagy for organizing this trip, and I would like to thank Mr. Yuan, who was generous enough to donate funds to reduce the financial burden on us students. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.